Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast. And today we have a really special treat because for the first time ever, we have a film and TV producer, also a video effects producer person, and that is Zach Hamelton. Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're very excited to have you, and I'm excited because you're the first guest of your type ever. Ever.
In the history of podcasts. That sounds much more epic. I think it might be this podcast, but we'll go with all podcasts because it sounds intense.
Our podcast has its own history, and that's the history that really matters to us right now, so...
Making history.
Yeah. We always start off with an origin story. Short or long version, how on earth did you get to where you are today? As in getting into the producing stuff, visual effects stuff. How did you get into all that?
Well, I was once born. No, I'm kidding. We won't go that far back. Right out of high school was an EMT very briefly. And then I had a brief stint as a owner of a cupcake business that specialized in alcohol-infused cupcakes. And I cannot tell you how many people now in my day-to-day, they're like, just give me the recipes. I'll make you a part owner. I'll give you percentage. Man, like, I don't know why you're not doing this because no one's doing it. And we were super successful. It honestly helped pay for my college, but I just didn't envision myself as a cupcake guy. So I decided, you know what? I'm too successful at this. I need to find something even more stable, like the film industry. And so, yeah, my parents loved that. And my mom was my business partner, by the way, too. So that was even better. She got a great job. She's a hospital director in California. She's doing great. But yeah, so I got into film and I initially went to Arizona State University and their film program. And I had an associate's degree, but still somehow ended up having a 3-year program there. And I'm like, this is insane. My student loans are going to be wild. And I was listening to a podcast and I heard Kevin Smith mention Dave School, the digital animation and visual effects school out of Orlando, Florida. And it sounded awesome. They're like, yeah, it's on the Universal Studios backlot. You're literally where movies are being made. And then you make movies and it's only 1 year and then you're in the business. I'm like, that sounds way better than what I'm doing. And it's only 1 year. And so I did it. I took the leap. I remember I told my dad I'm going to the Dave School. He's like, you're not going to a school named after someone's first name? What kind of school is this? So I went and it was great. And I definitely panicked towards the end. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to get a job. This is insane. And then 2 months out of graduation, I got a job at MPC Vancouver. Yeah, I'm in Florida. And I got a job in Vancouver, British Columbia. That's a trek. I'm like, well, I got the job. Now I got to get there. Fun fact, I was actually briefly homeless. After I got the job, they changed our student housing. And so at one point, I'm like sleeping in my car. I had this amazing job waiting for me. And I'm on the phone with my mother. And I'm like, yeah, I got this really great job, but I'm sleeping in my car. My mom's like, oh, my baby's sleeping in a car. And then her coworkers are like, what? He's homeless? I'm like, I have a job. I just have to make it till November. And then I have a job. Everything's going to be fine. So that was great. So a journey not fraught with obstacles for sure. But yeah, I got a job as an artist. So I was a visual effects artist. Visual effects being anything that we add to a film digitally. So you have your special effects, which would be like an explosion that they actually set off on set and they film it on camera. Whereas visual effects could be that same explosion, but they don't have the budget or the time to do it practically on set. So then after they film the scene, we add it digitally. So that would be a visual effect. That's the difference there. Often mixed up for sure, but that's kind of in essence a visual effect. So I did that for a year, and then the contracts were brutal. They were like 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, very short, very unstable. At the time I was young, I would have been probably like 24 or 25, and I was able to move around and do that because I was single and young and stupid. And then I realized, yeah, producer seems like they got it better. I hate saying this because like I'm a producer now, and I'm sure people are gonna listen to this and be like, wait, what? You got into this for? I got into it for good reasons. I promise my heart was in it. But I realized that like the VFX supervisor's like, I've been doing this for 15 years, man. And I'm like, oh my God, you work more hours than I do. And I'm here like 90 hours a week. So that's not what I want to do in 15 years. And then the producer was like making the same money, but only working 60 hours a week. I'm like, well, I'm starting to think maybe I need to switch things up a little bit. And I had some exposure doing some production type stuff on Justice League with the stereo packaging team. And they wanted me to coordinate and kind of help manage the workflow of what we were doing, as well as some of the newer artists that we were bringing on. And so I'm like, hey, I'm actually good at this. And so I kind of asked around, met with a couple of producers, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be a producer, but you need a bachelor's degree for that. Often, not always. As an artist, you don't need a degree. In production, it's a little bit more business minded. And so I got my bachelor's in 6 months. This is a long story. We went with the long version. I hope it's entertaining. I believe that it is. The school that I got my certificate through, the Dave School, offered me an online option. For 6 months at $1,500, I could have a bachelor's degree. I'm like, who says no to that? So definitely did that. Couldn't get work. And I definitely second guessed my decision. I'm like, oh my God, I cooled off. I can't get work. What's happening? I ended up as a hospital security guard for like 3 months between school and trying to get back into work into production. And I'm telling you, you want stories, be a hospital security officer, because my God, people are crazy. But yeah, I finally got in. It wasn't exactly film and television. It was themed entertainment. So we did ride film. When you go to like Harry Potter at Universal, they've got the screen and it looks like it's part of the ride, but it's digital and all that. So that's what we would do. And some other museum type stuff for National Geographic that was, again, virtual reality based. So that was really cool, but not what I wanted. And then my job was eliminated, which is brutal and very unexpected. And so I got forced into a corner, and within a week I got an offer in LA. Mind you, I forgot to mention, I got my job in production in Orlando. So I ended up back in Florida from Canada. So I'm just moving all over. And then I get this job in LA, and I'm like, great, I got a job, but now I got to move again. I mean, it's expensive to move. I'm used to it at this point. You'd think I get discounts at these places. I don't. And then literally a week later, I packed up most of my things, moved to LA, and now I'm living in one of the most expensive places ever. Finally making decent money though as a coordinator. And then yeah, I just slowly worked my way up. And in the last 3.5 years, I went from coordinator to producer. So now my official title is VFX producer on the current film that I'm on. It's been a journey.
Oh my goodness. So many follow-up questions. First of all, who has the life rights to your story?
Oh my God, I know I'm a screenwriter on my downtime. I just got to write it, the story of me. We'll see if it sells. Visual effects is way cool. We're like the rock stars of computer guys. Tattoos and beards and drinking.
You call yourself the rock stars, or they just want to admit that you're the rock stars?
I would say the FX guys definitely always think that they're the rock stars because they're the guys that are always blowing stuff up. And they're like, dude, all I do every day is explosions and like tornadoes and hurricanes, and I'm like an act of God digitally. Fair enough, that is a pretty cool job. I can't really argue that.
I have to concur with that one. But take it, CGI, stuff like that has anything to do with you, or that's something considered separate?
Yeah, CGI is computer generated images. I hope I got that right, because anyone who is in my industry, like, it's actually imagery. Basically anything that's an image that's generated from a computer. Obviously we use a lot of various softwares. My job now is no longer as an artist, so my job is managing the artist alongside the VFX supervisor and really the client-facing side of it, and wrangling the client, making sure that what they want is being done and is attainable within reason, obviously looking out for my own team of artists that are trying to facilitate what they want. So it's a little bit different, but we do it all. So I'm managing FX artists, lighting artists, modelers. Modelers would be people that are actually making a building or making a car. Texture artists that are actually making it look like a car as far as like the color, the reflections, all that. Riggers, animators, the whole pipeline. It's all head of the snake, unfortunately. Good and bad, but it's fun.
People start trashing the CGI on a film or something like that. What do you feel about that?
Oh my God, it's tough. My significant other, brother-in-law, his brother, I met him for the first time, and all he did was trash every movie I worked on. I'm like, I don't like this guy. I appreciate his honesty, but man, dial it back. This is like the 6th movie that you're trashing. I mean, what do you got against Clint Eastwood? He's amazing. That was like my pride and joy, by the way. To get to work on a Clint Eastwood movie was so awesome. Big moment. And then it wasn't until like halfway into production that I realized that I was working with Al Ruddy, who now is even more prominent because of the show The Offer on Paramount, which is all about the making of The Godfather. He's the producer that show's based off of his experiences on that. I'm like, oh my God, I worked with Al Ruddy, the producer of The Godfather. I've made it. And Clint Eastwood. I'm done. I'm ready. Hang up. Retire early.
Time to move back to Canada or something.
I loved it there. I really did. It was beautiful. Vancouver is like the cleanest city I've ever lived in. You would think it wouldn't be being a city, but you can see all the mountains. Beautiful. They take their recycling very seriously. There was like 7 different bins for the recycling. You have to literally read a chart like, did I recycle correctly? I don't know. This is a can. This is a soup can. Oh, that's different than this kind of can. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just a general question. Are you allowed to talk about the stuff that you work on, or is it everything has to be under wraps and NDAs?
Yeah, I could talk about certain things. It's usually stuff that's kind of already aired. Usually it's kind of the safe zone. Stuff that's currently airing or had just recently aired is usually a little bit tough to talk about. But like Star Trek Picard season 1, I could talk about stuff like that. But to that point, to lead into that was my first official TV show assignment in production once I moved from themed entertainment to that job in LA. Literally the end of the week, they're like, hey, you got this show. You're going to be the one running it with the producer. It's just you and the producer. You're dealing with the client. You're dealing with all the artists. I'm like, cool, what's it called? And it had a code name that I won't disclose. And I'm like, what is this, a poker show? No idea what I'm getting into at all. Cool, sounds good. It's probably some little indie, you guys are going to start me off nice and slow. I love it. I appreciate that, guys. 1,200 shot show. Massive. And to describe what a shot is, a lot of people don't understand, but just for those that don't, when you're watching a film, let's do a dialogue scene. You're talking over dinner, and the camera's looking at one actor, and then it cuts and it looks at the other actor who's talking, then it cuts and looks at, every time it's cutting, that's a shot. So that actual shot, and then it cuts to another shot. So that's a shot. 1,200 1,200 shots, roughly 1,200. It was probably like 1136. That was the amount of shots that we had for Star Trek Picard Season 1. It was a monster of a show. We were establishing looks that were then being used by other departments or other studios. It was nuts. And then it's also Star Trek, and it's also Picard, the first season. So you've got Patrick Stewart coming back, trying to keep that on the down low. It was just a really wild and fun show. I wasn't even a Star Trek fan. I've been forced to be a Star Trek fan because I've had to research it so heavily. In researching it, I love Star Trek. So for those listeners that are Star Trek fans, I do actually genuinely love the show now, but I was a Star Wars boy, and I would kill to be on a Star Wars show. Real talk. Or Star Trek. I love Star Trek, but it's been a huge part of my life. I've worked on both season 1 and 2 of Picard, as well as Strange New Worlds, which is really exciting because people are loving that show. So that was my most recent adventure into Star Trek.
Just from a technical point of view, when you actually get the footage or whatever, are you working on almost every single scene that's going to be out there? Like, what kind of stuff do you actually do to it, aside from just adding in an explosion? What can the job actually entail as far as that goes?
It really depends on the studio. So the way that the system is set up is you've got the clients, which would be like your CBS, your Sony, your Marvel. These are the actual film studios, Paramount, Apple, Netflix. And then you've got all the vendors. So the VFX vendors are like the VFX houses that are actually doing most of the work. On average, for any movie or TV show, you have anywhere from 2 upwards to as high as 8 different VFX vendors working on one project. So it all gets divvied up among everybody. That's a big part of my job as a producer, is bidding the work. So a lot of times we literally can get involved as early as the script phase. So you'll get a script come across your desk like, hey, this is what we're thinking for the show. Awesome. I'll take that. I'll run with it. I will crunch the numbers, tell them this is what it's going to cost to do this episode. And they're like, great. And then while I'm doing that, 3 or 4 other vendors are also bidding the exact same script. And then they're going to compare that. And they're not always going to go with the cheapest. They're going to go with people who are like, hey, these guys specialize in this kind of work. Let's maybe give these shots to these guys. These guys came in a little bit close to the other guys. Maybe we'll give them some shots. So it all starts to get divvied up. Ideally, you want to get more work, but take what you can for your team. You don't want to overwork your team either. So that's where that happens. On the smaller budget films, like I would say like something like Little Things is a good example. I worked on Little Things, a Denzel Washington movie, Rami Malek and Jared Leto, fantastic film. There was a lot of production stuff. So they're wearing sunglasses, as cool detectives do. But those sunglasses have reflections. They're driving cool old muscle cars with a bunch of chrome bumpers and chrome mirrors and chrome rear view mirrors and chrome everywhere. All have reflections. So now you're seeing the camera crew in those reflections, sunglasses, the bumpers, everything. There's little things like that, little things, ironically. I didn't even plan that then have to get cleaned up. So there's that aspect of it. Your invisible visual effects of people just removing the camera crew. That was an interesting show too, because it was also based in the 90s. And so the LA skyline was different too. So we had to remove certain buildings that didn't exist during the time that this was set in, as well as certain aspects like just the freeway signage. They didn't have the reflective paint back then. They were actually lit up and illuminated by lights, and they had a different shade of green. So literally every freeway sign has to now get kind of retouched up, look darker, look like it's being illuminated. So there's a lot of invisible effects that are happening that no one's going to know. Obviously, there's then the real visual effects. And again, I haven't worked on a Marvel film, but I will use like Thanos as an example, or Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy, where it's a fully digital character. And that's where you get a lot of scrutiny, like, it doesn't look that real. Well, yeah, because obviously raccoons don't walk around and talk. So you've already put it in under a microscope very quickly. There's obviously that aspect too. But then it's also things like, I think people don't think about this too, is even commercials are like this. When you see a television screen or a cell phone, oftentimes the screen is completely black or it's a green screen, and then we then have to add stuff from the editorial department in post and actually add like whatever's on there, or they haven't even filmed it yet. There's been shows I've worked on where like, oh, there's gonna be all these security cameras and they're gonna have this feed and this feed and this feed. You're like, cool. And then we're in pre-production. They're like, yeah, guys, we're not gonna be able to film that shot by the time that we're filming this, like all the inserts. So then they film that later, give it to us, and then we just add it in post. So there's a lot of that too. There's also beauty makeup. It used to be a hush-hush thing in the business where people didn't talk about it. It still is somewhat hush-hush, but less so now because you're getting a lot more of these de-aging projects, right? Where like everyone knows. For instance, Robert Downey Jr., very famously in the Marvel movies, there's that famous de-age scene where he's young. Kurt Russell, that's a perfect one in Guardians of the Galaxy. Obviously, he's not in his 30s, but it looks so good. You're like, I can believe it though. So there's a lot of examples of that's a little more mainstream, which is such a process, let me tell you. And there's some studios that's what they specialize in, and they're experts and they're wizards, and I don't know how they do it. It's fantastic. I've worked for some of them.
Wow. You think that someone just takes a camera and films someone and then you edit it and now you have a movie. And it's no, that's not how it works. So You're considered post-production. So is the film edited by the time you see it? They haven't fully put it together. How much of the story do you actually see? They send you random shots like, hey, we need you to clean up X, Y, and Z on this. Figure it out.
Really varies. A good example, The Cleaning Ladies. Fantastic show on Fox. That was a show that was really interesting, and it just goes to show you the lengths of how far along you could be involved with the project. So that show came to us in script form as a pilot. And we bid it out as a pilot. We got it. We were the only VFX house initially on that. I think we ended up being the only one, at least for the pilot. I know others got involved down the road. So they filmed the pilot. You've got the budget for the pilot. We do all the visual effects for it. And then now it goes and they're trying to get Fox to pick it up or whatever network to pick it up and greenlight it. So then there was a little bit of a gap, about a month or so gap, and then it gets greenlit. And like, cool. And they loved our work. So they came back to us, which you always want a client to be happy for these exact reasons. So they came back to us, and then now we're going on the actual first season. So we literally went from like this script for the pilot, all the various iterations of that, to filming the pilot, having our guys on set for that, doing all the post-production for that, then now doing all of season 1, which I did leave halfway in the middle of, but the team really just killed it in the end as well. Really just wrapped out that season fantastically. But yeah, like you could literally be on a show from the pilot all the way through the first season. It's crazy. Now, when you're getting footage sent to you, it could be, especially in episodics, they film stuff sometimes out of order. They're doing, okay, we've got episode 1, we're editing episode 1. All right, now we're working on episode 2. Now you start getting some footage from episode 1. This isn't now Cleaning Ladies specific. This is just episodics in general. Let's say maybe there's a reshoot on episode 3 that they have to do for a certain sequence. Well, you know, we're going to put episode 3 on the back burner, but we'll give you episode 4. So now you're working out of order, but you're still getting everything, and you're all trying to, as a producer, maintain that schedule so that everything gets done properly for the air dates. Sometimes it could still be shooting. A lot of times you'll also get marketing requests. So in the middle of working on actual shots for the show, like, hey, there's this really cool shot from episode 15, and we want you to go ahead and just do that shot real quick because we want to put it in a trailer for this show. Dude, I'm not even like remotely focused on episode 15. We're like on episode 5, for instance. And then now you've got to like cherry pick these couple of shots from episode 15, somehow wrangle that into your schedule while also not impeding your episode 5. So that happens a lot too. What's really cool about marketing is sometimes you'll get shots that people see in a trailer and then they see it in the show and it's a completely different shot. Like it looks vastly different. And that's because a lot of times these marketing shots, they get maybe 75%, 80% of the way done, and that's good enough for a trailer, like a teaser. And then they really finesse it, make it look beautiful for the actual show. And the perfect example of this was for Justice League. That whole third act, that big battle sequence, the sky is bright red. In the initial takes of that, it was dark blue in the Snyder Cut. So there's actually trailers, early trailers of Justice League prior to the Snyder Cut release that just happened. But there were trailers initially for Justice League that had Aquaman flying through the sky and lightning and landing on the Batmobile, and it's all dark blue sky. And then later, as the show's now that they've done all the reshoots, now they're Whedon's involved and everything, they've retweaked it. You're seeing those exact same shots in the trailer, but now the sky's red. Vast changes. So that's an obvious one. They're not always that obvious, but it can be something as obvious as that. It's crazy.
Who do you communicate with? The director? You're communicating with one of the producers? Who do you speak with?
The client side, let's say Sony or Disney or whatever, they've got their own management team. So they've got their own VFX producer like myself, their own VFX supervisor. And the supervisor is in charge of the artistic vision, making sure that whatever the director wants, that artistically is happening, and managing the artist and making sure that they have their creative notes and that creative vision. Whereas a producer, it's more budgetary, scheduling, managing the artist from more of a business mindset and making sure that schedules are being met, making sure that obviously we're not going over budget, keeping track of that if we do, and then the relationship with the client. The supervisor's phone's probably not getting blown up as much as mine might be. I take that on so that the supervisor can focus on the art of it all. They have the same team over there, client side. So you would be interacting with the supervisor and the producer for the client. Definitely going to be in meetings with the director, with potential producers, like the actual producer or executive producers of the film might get involved. And then if you're on a TV show and you're in production and we're on set for it, because a lot of times you'll have a supervisor that's actually physically on set to kind of help guide them through visual effects shots that they're doing to make sure that they film it properly so that they get what the desired effect is. Then you're in pre-production and production meetings as well. I've been on some episodics where I'm literally in production meetings 3 out of 5 of my days, and those meetings could last as long as 4 hours, and you're in there with like props and costumes and practical effects, locations, and everyone's got something to say, and then it gets to visual effects. You say your 5 to 10 minute speech, and then now everyone else got their 5 to 10 minutes. So you can be in all kinds of meetings. It's crazy. Primarily you deal with the client side VFX supervisor, producer, as well as the director of the film or TV project.
What's your kind of turnaround that you get? Now, I know this is a rush project for a film or for an episode. Are you 2 episodes ahead of what the release is? Are you in a totally different schedule than that?
Ideal situation is, yeah, you're ahead of schedule. And then there can be some projects that you work on that just last a really long time due to unforeseen situations, literally like Orville. I worked on Orville almost 3 years ago as a coordinator. As that season I worked on is just now coming out. Check it out, Orville season 3. So there's definitely situations like that. But again, that's more act of God pandemic happened in there, and that definitely derailed things. And they did a fantastic job adapting to that, as did the whole industry. In television, your turnaround times are going to be a little snappy. You get to a point where like you're literally delivering an episode every week. Every other week, you're delivering it. When I say like Star Trek Picard was 1,200 shots, well, that was across the entirety of the season. So it's not like we had 1,200 shots to do for one episode. Could have been like 100 shots to do for one episode and maybe only 30 for this episode. They vary in complexity and just in general quantity of the work. But it is usually a snappier timetable that does unfortunately make the work sometimes not look as good. I've been very fortunate on all the shows I've worked on where we were given enough time or budget to really make them look cinema quality. And that's definitely kind of become more of a norm nowadays, especially when you're working on like Netflix shows for Apple. They have a lot of budget and they want their stuff to look as good as possible. And it's not that the other studios don't want their work to look good. It's just the constraints of like, this is the budget we have. If we want to make this show, we got to make it for this much money. Otherwise, it doesn't get made at all. So compromises. Yeah, it can be tight. But I mean, I've definitely delivered an episode. Like I've delivered shots for an episode at like 3 a.m. and the episode aired that night, technically. So it's been that down to the wire. Film's a little different, especially if you're doing a film. It's kind of gone away, the 3D movies in theaters, but that used to kind of give you a grace period of at least a minimum of 2 weeks before it released, because anything that you did would then have to go through the stereoscopic process where they actually make your 2D footage into 3D. So that would buy you some time, but even then we'd cut it really close to theater release. Yeah, it's been wild. So on the one hand, you can have really tight deadlines. On a good way, you're like 3 episodes ahead of schedule. Ideally, you wrap your show, you're done on the final episode, and then your episode doesn't air for like 3 weeks. That's an ideal situation. And you aim for that. And a lot of times it is like that. It's not always crazy. Or it just gets dragged out and you work on a movie for like 2-3 years because it goes from one studio to another studio or gets bought by a different place, or, anything can happen.
Well, you keep referring to your team, I guess, as artists. Are we calling them artists because it's kind of like an animation, but it's not animated, but that's sort of what they're doing? Are they actually drawing the explosion? Or
it's an art form for sure. And obviously, it's digital, and I think that can be very confusing to people that just like film, but they don't understand certain processes of it. Explosions and dust storms and tornadoes and wind and waves, all these crazy things. Again, we're really kind of focusing in on the effects department, but these are all simulations. So there is a mathematical aspect to these. And I can't really talk 100% to these. I'm a producer. I'm not the one that's actually doing these, but they're simulations that are based on physics. So they would get a model of a building that they're going to destroy and then type in their calculations, work with the software, really try to get a good physics system in place so that like, this is what would happen if this building actually collapsed. And then they are able to actually simulate that. And so now it would crumble like this. Well, what if it was like this amount of pressure and then this, and then now it crumbles differently? Same with fire. And all of this has to then get rendered out. So there is a lot of mathematical aspects to it too. For models, for sure. I mean, you're taking a photo of something, be it a person or be it a character, especially like in your full CG animation, DreamWorks and Pixar. Here's a drawing of a character. Now make this a digital 3-dimensional thing that you can then put bones into. Truly what happened, if you went through the pipeline, let's go through that real quick. You've got a drawing of this really cool character. We need to animate this character. We need to put her into scenes. And so now a modeler is going to take those drawings, they're going to make a 3D model of this person, almost like a sculpture that you would out of clay, but digitally. It looks like them kind of, but it's just a gray model. And then now a texture artist has to come in there. And oftentimes it literally is like digital painting. You've got tablets all over the place somewhere where you can literally draw onto 3D models. You're painting all the textures, all the cloth, doing all the texture sims of like, this is the kind of shirt that it's wearing. You're working on the skin textures. This is the kind of luminescence that would come off the skin if a light hits it, just like real skin. It really gets to that type of nuance or level of detail. Once the texture's all done for that character, then a rigger comes in. And that rigger has to literally put the bones, if you will, into the body. So right now it's just skin and it's not going to do anything. So you got to actually put the bones to a degree. And in some cases, literal bones. If you look at stuff on like Lion King, there are like full bone systems that would mimic what an actual lion looks like with muscles, with skin, that's all working in unison. So as an animator is moving the legs, the actual muscles themselves are moving how they normally would. It can get to that level of detail. It's crazy. So a rigger is rigging all of that. Once that's done, that allows the animator now to be able to animate, because the rigger rig is there, the bones are there, those bones have controls, so now they can move everything down to the fingertips. If there's hair, that could go to effects or hair and creature effects where they actually do the hair so it reacts how it would against simulations. As the character's moving, the hair moves a certain way. And then now it's getting put into a scene. The lighters would light that scene, put in like the sunlight or the different lights in a room so that it looks like an actual scene. Again, you would have had models and texture artists doing the actual environment that this character's going into. Once all that's done, then it would go to a compositor whose job, if it's a full CG, is really to add that cinema quality, the defocus, the extra camera effects to make it look as though it's filmed to a degree, and layer everything in together so that now you finally have all the puzzle pieces. Now they all come together to make art, hopefully. So that's a full CG pipeline. And it's similar for live action. If you were doing that for like a car you had to put into a real scene, you would do all the same things. You would rig it too so you could animate it, and then you would put it into an actual like plate, an actual shot that you have, actual footage. And that's even trickier because then now the lighter has to match the actual lighting of the actual set of the day and make sure that it all works together. So that's a whole other bag. It's a lot of work. It's really cool though. You see some stuff, you're just like, oh my God. Working on Winning Time was a real treat for me. I worked on like the first 5 episodes of that show on HBO, and you'll see it in the behind the scenes if you follow their Instagram account. They just had one arena, like just one court, and then they had maybe 3 to 5 rows of bleachers, and the rest was just green screen. We're filming in Boston, we're filming in Philadelphia, we're supposed to be in Los Angeles at the Forum, we're supposed to be San Diego, like all these different arenas, but it's all just the same court that then we digitally made all these arenas, and then we had to fill in all the crowds to make it look like there's audience in there. It's just wild. And when you watch that show, no one thinks that they're not actually in an arena and those aren't real people in the crowd.
Can you usually spot this stuff right away, or do you actually look for it so that's why you could spot it?
That's the one thing they don't warn you about when you get into this business is like you cannot watch TV and movie the same ever again. Like you're always going to notice it. And I always give people the benefit of the doubt because I've been under the gun of a rough deadline. Crunch time's a real thing. It's usually like the last month to 2 to 3 weeks of the production where you're trying to hit that deadline. Everyone's working crazy hours. You're trying to get the best that you can. But like all good art, it's never that you made bad art. It's just you ran out of time. So I always give them the benefit of the doubt for that because I've been in those situations. But yes, 100% you see it and you're like, oh man, I would have done that differently. Or, oh, you know, I wonder if it was a budget reason or maybe this was a last minute thing. Like, oh yeah, you see it all the time. And then there's some that you'll watch a breakdown or you'll see a magazine piece about it. Like I had like Logan really surprised me. Some of the head replacement stuff on that. I'm like, that was right in front of camera. We're at a really great place right now in visual effects. We're able to get a fidelity that's really believable. Logan was not at that time. I mean, yes, visual effects looked really good at that time, but to have like a full head replacement of a stunt driver right in front of the camera, I mean, it's bold. Very bold, and I never noticed it, and I was in the business.
Wow. Let's say, for example, okay, so even for something like that, or like you mentioned the street signs, that it's 1990s, they were lit differently. You can't just fix up one and then like apply all. You have to like freeze everything, and then you're literally going.
Yeah, I mean, you'll set a look. So a lot of times a senior artist will take on a shot. They'll finish the shot. This is what we're going for. That'll then go up the chain with the producers and the directors of the film or TV show, and they'll be like, I love this. I love this. You know what? I don't like this. I don't know what you were thinking here. You need to change that. We'll change it. Do all that. Once we finally get something that everybody loves, then that's now the established look, the hero shot, if you will. Mid to junior artists can then replicate that on all their shots, and they can kind of copy and paste some of those aspects of that shot into their own. But yeah, ultimately, yeah, every sign has to get touched up. Every sign's different. You have to account for the camera itself. If the camera's driving down the road and you have signs coming, you have to track that camera's movement so that you can then track in the actual sign that you're replacing. And then period films especially, 90s is one thing. There's a lot of liberties you can take with the 90s. But then you do something that's like in the 20s, for instance, and it's like, dude, all these cars definitely did not exist. These phone booths, which now are few and far between, not as big of a problem nowadays. They didn't exist in the 20s. Certain street lights, even like the traffic lights, you got to remove all of it and then usually replace it with something. So it can get pretty extensive.
Wow. The only thing I'm thinking of is photoshopping an image or something. So you got your Adobe Photoshop or something, and you have to layer, and that's how you finally get what you want. So you're kind of doing that for film, but with
moving images. Yeah, I used to always joke that was kind of like the job of a compositor, which is what I used to do because I was that last step of the pipeline we went through when you get all the pieces and now you got to put it into the actual footage and make it look like we actually filmed it for real. It's like that, but it's moving images. And it's crazy because we go by frames. You know, an average shot would be anywhere between like 80 to 120 frames. And then you would divide that by 24 frames a second. So 120 frames would be 5 seconds. Which, when you think about the amount of work sometimes that goes into 5 seconds of footage on our end, we could have been working on a shot for literally 4 weeks, and that shot is 5 seconds of film. It really blows your mind sometimes. You're like, man, but damn if that explosion does not look amazing, right? Or, oh, that car looks great, or whatever. And that's the best case scenario. There's so many shots that are like literally 3 seconds long, 2 seconds long, and then you spent like 2 weeks on it.
That's like the original animation when they have to draw every single thing, and then it's kind of like the flip book kind of look. That's kind of what you guys do, but like...
Yeah, and that animation still exists. Obviously, you have stop motion animation, of course. But then even now in digital animation, there's still keyframe animation that has that spirit of this is this pose, this is this pose, this is this pose, and then you do all the in-between to make everything smooth. But it still exists.
Well, anything that you're sent is for sure going to make it in. Or do they sometimes send you something to work on that might get cut? The cuts have already happened or the cuts haven't happened yet?
That would incur what we like to call as producers Costa Dates. It happens all the time because really it can be up to like 2 to 3 months out from a film being released that they haven't even locked the edit. So you could be working on shots that then they go, oh, I hate to do it to you, man, but that really cool shot you're working on that everybody loves? Like, yes. Like, yeah, it's not in the edit anymore. And we've got these new shots you got to do instead. And you're like, oh, great. Learning experience, right? You try to take whatever you did on that, put it in the next shot. But we still get paid for that. We would be like, all right, well, we were like 75% done with this shot, so you guys owe us 75% of what we were going to charge you for that. That's a common thing in the business, again, cost a date. So you do get paid for it, but it's always frustrating for the artist. Like, I worked so much overtime for this shot, and it's not even in it. It happens. It's always a tough conversation to have with an artist as a producer. Be like, look, I know you love that shot. I love that shot, and I love it for you, but unfortunately, it's not in the edit anymore, man. Like, what?
Oh, no.
Try to tell them that early in the day, not at like midnight, because that's rough. Here's some whiskey. Kidding.
Is there a lot of research that has to be done by these artists or by anybody who's making the looks down?
Yeah, sometimes a VFX supervisor for the client, for Marvel or whatever, will give you kind of like what they're going for, and they'll give you kind of a lookbook of, we're kind of going for this look. Winning Time was a good example of that, because if you've seen the show, they really try to nail not only the period, but also the aesthetic of film during that time. So everything looks as though not only is it taking place in the early 80s, late 70s, but was actually filmed in the late 70s, early 80s. So that's a whole other nuance that you have to think about too, and lighting certain things, how that would affect the camera. So you get that too, but sometimes you get like an F-16, you're like, yeah, we really like this F-16. You're like, cool, do you have a certain kind of F-16? You're like, give us some ideas. And so you'll go through actual F-16s and some of the designs, some of the labels that they would do, so even down to like the rivet patterns that are on these F-16s. You'll give them some ideas. It's a collaboration with the client. And once they figure that out, then you give all that information to the artist, and then they make an F-16 to those specifications.
Well, visual effects people then just have like a random collection of knowledge then.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely start to acquire, like, every studio has like an obnoxious amount of assets that they've worked on throughout the time, that some of them that they're able to license for themselves and keep after a project, for sure. Everyone's got like a tree library, like, oh, you need a tree? I got like these 1,000 trees over here. Oh, you need palm trees? I got another 500 palm trees over here. Like, that's a little exaggerated, but definitely there is that. Or even cars, like, yeah, I got some, lower end cars, like low poly that won't be too big on the scene. We could do, got some really high end stuff over here that you could use. There's definitely a lot of rinse and repeat for sure, or just tweaking it, making it unique for the show. But yeah, that definitely is a thing for sure.
If your team is on set, they're not doing anything to the shot then. It's more about...
Let me rephrase that. So the only people that would be on set would be the VFX supervisor, maybe a data wrangler who's kind of helping manage all the VFX like shot numbers and that data that comes with that. And then some cases the producer. So like for me, when I'm on set for usually like the first week or 2 weeks of production. And that's really just to kind of interact with the client, help out with any production needs that are needed on set from a VFX side of things. And it's also really to establish that relationship. I mean, you're dealing with multi-million-dollar contracts, and these could be people that you just met. So being able to meet in person, take people out to dinner, converse with them in person, face to face, can be really relieving. You're like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. Definitely want to pay this guy a bunch of money to do the work on this. So that can be really great. So it really just be like those core people. The actual artists themselves, they always work in the studio. And sometimes they'll get taken out to set as a data wrangler if they're interested in set experience. Then that can be an option for them. And we'll train them up to like figure out like, okay, these are things you need to keep in mind when you're on set. These are things that we're going to need you to help out with. And then they kind of get that set experience. But usually it's just a supervisor and a data wrangler. Small team. A lot of responsibility, though.
Yeah. This goes all the way back. Did you always want to work in film? Or it's only because you sort of fell into that you ended up being here?
When I was younger, I saw the movie A Nightmare Before Christmas, and I was like, I want to be an animator. This is amazing. I love this. This is so cool. I literally went to visual effects school, and one of the courses I had to take was animation. And unfortunately, not my strongest class. As much as I wanted it to be, it was not. But I loved it. But there just wasn't as many jobs, and so I kind of fell into compositing. But yeah, I always wanted to do it. When I was in high school, I went to a school called EVIT, Peace Valley Institute of Technology, which was super awesome. Half the day you went to high school, the other half of the day you got to work on a computer with a bunch of other cool people and literally make movies and model stuff in 3D and like learn all this cool stuff at a young age. But yeah, I didn't get into it until later. I think I just thought it was like too risky. I think that happens to a lot of us. We're like, oh, well, this job is paying the bills and it's not exactly what I want to do, but I don't hate it. And you kind of fall into this rut. Not to say that you're settling, but it kind of happens. It happens to all of us. And I think sometimes you got to just really go for it. To not quote the younger generation of the YOLO, but you do really only get one turn around, the world. Oh, and do you want to live it with regret or do you want to at least go for it? And I think there's also people get aged out. They're like, oh, dude, I'm like 35. I'm going to get into film now. I'm like, dude, you could do this. Like legit, you could do this. I think money's a big concern for a lot of people. I totally get that. But like as a visual effects artist, and this is kind of, I won't specify the locations I was at. Starting out, yeah, it's tough, man. Like when I lived in Vancouver, I made like $30,000 a year US, and that's an expensive city, like arguably up there with LA. I had like a 360 square foot studio apartment and no car. It was crazy. My bed literally folded into a wall. But I loved it, man. I was doing what I wanted to do, and I worked so much overtime. I probably ended up making like 45, 50,000 that year. But literally within like 2 years, I was making like 55, 60,000 a year. There's not a lot of jobs where you could literally double your pay within a year or two. Obviously now, not specific to any one studio, but my rate is 6 figures. I've been doing this now for over 6 years, going on 7 years. To go from like 30,000 to over 6 figures, that's really fast. So the money's there if you're willing to put in the time, but it is hard. I moved a lot, as you could hear in my journey. Being in a relationship, that's challenging. One of my best friends, shout out to Brad, also in the business, and he got married in college when we were at Dave's school, and then he moved to Canada with his wife. Then they ended up having a family, and it's like, that's insane to me, but he made it work, and he's got a great support system. His wife's amazing. His kids are fantastic. They made it work. So, even in that case, it's still doable. But yeah, it's challenging, but anything worth doing is going to be hard, right? I really went on a rant there. But do things, man. Like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, to quote the great one.
Yeah. I want to ask more questions, but I almost want to leave on such a good uplift. Now you had the pep talk.
I can always come back later. Is there anything that you do want to ask before we wrap up, though?
I want to ask about everything. So we'll wrap up here with that. We wrap up with the I really like it when, and then using, if you want to put in a visual effects thing, you could also, but anything story kind of related. So it could be a show, it could be a writer or editor or producer or director or anything remotely. You can do poster art, anything related. Really like X, and I really don't like X.
I'm going to flip it upside down. We're going to start with I really don't like, and then end with I really like, keeping that ending with positivity. I really don't like it when people are super negative. They want to crush people's dreams. I really hate that. Genuinely. If you have a passion for something, as long as it's not going to end in someone being murdered or any other kind of terrible thing, then go for it. Don't let other people's opinions of you affect you. However, on the same vein of I really don't like when people try to squash people's dreams, I really love it when they try with me, because I'm one of those people that use that as fuel. I love the comment that I got so much when I was trying to get in this business, which was, well, at least you have an associate's degree to fall back on. Well, at least you got these things you could do. Like, I was working in the business for like 2 years. I had literally worked on like Justice League and like 50 Shades Freed. Not one of my, it's a cool movie, not one I thought I'd work on, but it was a popular movie, and I still had people being like, well, at least you got an associate's degree. But I'm like, dude, I'm literally working. Like, I haven't lost a job. Like, a working actor, I keep working. Like, yeah, okay. Honestly, it was probably 3 years in that people finally were like, oh, it's great that you're in the business. That's so cool. So there's a lot of naysayers. The naysayers. I don't like naysayers. There you go. But I love them at the same time, because then, like, when you are successful, those are the people that come out of the woodwork like, I always knew that you of all people would work out or whatever. But it fuels you. It gives you drive. You're like, you know what? Screw those guys. We got this. We can do this.
Amen. Very, very good. Zach, thank you. It was a lot of fun speaking with you.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast featuring film and TV producer Zach Hamelton. To find out more about Zach and his work, please visit the link in the episode notes. Find out more about Oh My Word Podcast and keep track of all the great stuff we're up to. Follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word Podcast, or check us out at eltenenbaum.com. Music is by Tim Burke. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch you next time.